Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on boiler and pressure vessel regulatory amendments. My name is Cecile Caswell, and I am part of the client education team. With me today, I have our Senior Safety Officer, Raj Kamboj, and he will be going through the presentation with us today. During the presentation, the audio will be muted, so if you do have any questions, if you could please place those in the chat. We will go through the questions at the end of each section and also at the very end of the presentation itself. And also today's presentation will be recorded. Thank you very much, and I will pass it over to Raj.
Thank you, Cecile. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for joining. My name is Raj Kamboj, and I am the Senior Safety Officer with Boiler and Pressure Vessels. So welcome again. The agenda for today, we would be going over Province of BC Certificate of Qualification renewals. We would be talking about recognition of international credentials as a power engineer, in short, internationally trained work ITW. We're going to be talking about a Province of BC plant registration and plant operating permits. And in this presentation, we will interpret changes to the Power Engineers, Boiler, Pressure Vessel, and Refrigeration Safety Regulation, as explained in Information Bulletin A1 2017-01. These changes affect all plant owners, affect all certificate holders, internationally trained workers in power engineering field. Okay, so before we start, we will go over a disclaimer statement. This presentation is strictly for information purposes only. In the event of conflict, the requirements stated in the Safety Standard Act and the reference regulation will take precedence. Okay, let's jump into the first section, Province of BC Certificate of Qualification Renewal. So why renew certificates? So we would be going over the new regulatory requirement, and the reason why it was brought, the certificate renewal was brought, because in the past the certificate of qualifications were issued without expiry date. They did not have any expiry printed on the certificate itself, and we were not having any proper count of all the certificate of qualification holders. So moving forward, all the certificate of qualification will be issued with an expiry date and will require periodic renewal. This change will affect all certificate types under the boiler regulation: refrigeration operators, all classes of power engineers, oil well boiler operators, antique show boiler operators, ice facility operators, boiler safety awareness certificate holders, refrigeration safety awareness certificate holders, and it also applies to pressure welders. So what is the benefit of renewal? So we are on slide benefit of renewal, yes. So what is the benefit of renewals? So to determine the number of qualified individuals active in the province, the regulatory authority needs to be aware, accurately determine how many number of qualified individuals are active in the province and how many are effectively working in this field of power engineering. So in case of power engineering, an individual that has progressed from 4th to 1st becomes a holder of 4 active certificates. So for example, I have a first class power engineer certificate of qualification, and I also hold a 4th, a 3rd, a 2nd, and all of these certifications were active. So it becomes challenging to manage all these active certification. So going forward, only the highest class of certification will be renewed. So at this time, I am only allowed to renew my first class, and that's what I have done. So the employers or other jurisdictions cannot easily verify if an individual is a holder of current certification. By having accurate data on power engineers, we would be able to publish that data, and any employer will be able to log in and see if the certification is active or not. So this will allow employers to ensure that certifications are current and valid. It will also remove all the redundant certificates. The certification holder might not be in the province, certification holder might be even not living today, so that's why it is very important to have an accurate count of all the certificate of qualification holder in our province. Okay, so in 2017, Technical Safety BC notified affected clients and stakeholder of the change. All the transferred existing certificates to new certificate with an expiry date and issue new certificate of qualification with an expiry date. So in 2017 we started this. It all started with the Ministerial Order M065, which was deposited in February of 2017, which amended the Power Engineering Boiler Pressure Vessel Regulation. It also amended the general regulations and the safety standards and the other regulations like gas regulations and elevator regulations, but we would be only focusing on the boiler regulation today. Okay, so in 2018, which is this year, we have already started all the existing certificate issued without an expiry date must be renewed on before December 2nd, 2018 at no cost in order to remain valid. So any certificate, the regulation clearly says the BC Reg 104 2004. If you see the current version of the regulation, it clearly states that any certificate of qualification which does not has an expiry would expire on December 2nd, 2018. So that's the virtual date which is in the system at this time. So all the certificate which does not has expiry would expire on that day. And certificate that are not renewed by the expiry date would expire on December 3rd, 2018. So the system would automatically have a status that the certificate has expired. So going forward, 2019, any expired certificate may be reinstated with new certificate up to December 2nd, 2019, and the fee may apply. So if you want to renew now, it is only a renewal with no fee, but if somebody renews after December 2nd, 2018, it will be a case of reinstatement and there may be a fee applied. Certificates that are not reinstated by December 3rd, 2019 are no longer valid and will not be recognized under the regulation. So there is a 1-year period where it would be simple reinstatement, but after December 3rd, 2019, there might be requirement for other things. It might be extra examination, it might be extra, so that reinstatement policy is still not drafted, so it is being drafted at this time. But it is better to renew it before December 2nd because otherwise there would be unnecessary reinstatement procedure that needs to be followed. Going forward in 2020 and beyond, all certificates will be subject to a renewal period of 3-year cycle. So if somebody is getting a certificate now, they all automatically have a 3-year expiry on those printed certificates. So and every 3 years, the certificates will be renewed. The process for reinstatement or invalid certificate has not been determined at this time, and it would be determined and it would be published on our website. So recommendation for all the certificate of qualification holders: renew your certificate prior to September 2018. Why I say September 2018? Because we don't want people to be waiting unnecessarily with their renewal, and they are, gonna be severely affected because of long delays at that time. Because we are right now, as it stands, we have only renewed about 2,000 certificate, and we are anticipating another 8,000 to 10,000 certificate holders to be knocking on our doors. So it is very important that renew your certificate prior to September, and you would be receiving, how it is being done is through the client portal. So you would be getting information how to log in into your client portal, and you would be logging into the client portal and filling out a simple form and attaching your old certificate, and that's it. And once you submit that, the process time at this time is about 2 to 3 weeks. You would be receiving your confirmation that your certificate has been renewed, and then the certificate would be available for you to download on the website, on the online portal, and you would also be getting a hard copy of the certificate with the wallet card. For any questions on the certificate of qualification renewal process, or anything, or even the client portal, how to log in into the client portal, please contact our toll-free number 1-866-566-7233, or you can visit our website, or you can even email contact@technicalsafetybc.ca. Okay. Any question on this portion of the presentation? Cecil, do we have any questions registered at this time?
So there's one question. It says, does the database list certificate holders employed? And can employers search this database? And can they get contact information from the database?
Good question, very good question. Because once we have all the certificate renewed, then we would have the database which we will be publishing on our website. It will be an online directory where the employer can search you by search a certificate by their last name or by certificate number. Only thing will be available is whether the what class of certificate it is, and when it is expiring, or what is the status of the certificate. Is it active or not active? So that is the information which will be available on that database. But we are once we have the data, then only this will happen. So it would not be happening this year. It would be happening next year. But the employers would be able to get would not be able to get the contact information. They would be only able to get your name and the certificate class and the expiry date. No other information like where you're working, no other private information will be shared on that. Any other questions we have on this topic, Cecil?
At this moment, that's the only question we have. May I ask, when you are typing your questions, if you can please make sure that the send to is selected to everyone so that everybody's able to see the question in the chat. Thank you.
And if somebody has any question on this topic, they can still ask that question. We will take it at the end of our presentation. Okay. Okay, so moving on, next topic we're going to be talking about is the international credentials as a power engineer. So one of the changes made to the general regulation, which is also called BC Reg 105/2004. So you can Google BC Reg 105/2004, and it would be, the regulation is called Safety Standard Act General Regulation. And the general regulation got amended by this ministerial order last year, and it enables international credential to be recognized in the field of power engineering. So we're going to talk about that. So what used to happen before is that previously the individuals with international credential could only apply for 4th class or for 5th class power engineers examinations. They were not allowed to go more than 4th class, higher than 4th class. But by this regulation change, the international credentials can be recognized for certificate of qualification higher than 4th class. So somebody who has equivalence credential in a country which regulates boiler regulations, which regulates boiler operators, so they could have those credentials can be recognized based on their experience, based on their education level, at a higher than 4th class. So they can be coming at a 3rd class level, or can be at 2nd or even 1st class level. So why was this change made in the regulation? The change was made to help the labor market demands, and to address the projected shortage of 1st class and 2nd class power engineers, and it was to respond to the global market trends and international trade agreements. It will also bring BC to the power engineering in line with the national vision and movement towards the foreign qualification recognitions. So, and to tell you, like, BC is the only province in Canada which is allowing a person to be coming at higher than third class, higher than fourth class level. All other provinces at this time are only allowing people to be coming only at a fourth class level. So what it is all about, okay? So the overview: applicant must have an international credential. So when we say international credential, it is defined in the regulation as a credential which allows a person to operate a boiler in a particular jurisdiction. So, like for example, if in Australia, in some of the states in Australia, they regulate boiler qualifications. So, person can hold a level 1 boiler operator certification in Australia or Queensland, for example, and then they are able to operate a first-class boiler plant in Australia. So they can come at a level, they can come and apply for second class, and then they would be assessed. Their education will be assessed to be equivalent to a third-class certificate holder, and their experience needs to be minimum like of that particular class which they are applying, but they are not getting any certificate. They are only being eligible for the exam. So they still would be writing exam in our province, but they would be allowed to write those exam at a higher class. So for more like definitions and what exactly changed, I would encourage you to go to the general regulations. So you can Google BC Reg 105 2004, and this change became effective from December 15, 2017. The training and the work experience, anybody applying through this process needs to be equivalent to a boiler to the regulations which we have currently. So as explained to you, like they need to have, suppose if for third class somebody needs to like 6 and 12, 18 months of experience in a third class plant, then they need to have that they need to prove that they have that experience. And in our province, we need to have, the applicant need to have a minimum fourth class. So the education requirement for a person applying, they need to prove that they have necessary education which covers minimum fourth class. So to give you an update, we have received on this topic, we have only received about 3 applications till date. It went live on December 15, 2017, and since then we have only received 3 applications. But all those 3 applications, although they came as an internationally trained worker, but they were only assessed at the fourth class level. So what is required for the candidate? The candidate needs to prove their qualification meets or exceeds the standard, and they would still need to complete the provincial exams appropriate to their qualification and experience. So to summarize, applications have been accepted since December 15, 2017. An applicant needs to hold a valid credential in a boiler operation, and that credential needs to be in good standing in that particular jurisdiction, and they need to have a qualifying experience and the training obtained. So, but we would be able to recognize that international credential under this program. So, any question on this topic?
We did receive one question, and it asks about if they have to write the exam or if it's just issued, but I believe you covered that.
Yes, so I will reiterate, yeah, they would be assessed at that particular level, but they would be only allowed to write the exam at that level, and they have to pass those exams in order to get that certificate of qualification. Yes, they are not getting any certificate of lower class. So even if person is eligible to write second class exam, they are not getting a third class. They are only eligible to write the exams. And once they pass all the exams, then only they become a second class certificate of qualification holder. Okay, good. So if there are any further questions on this topic, you can still submit it and we can take it at the end, so. Moving on, the last segment, the third segment of our webinar is on plant registration. So that was also another change which was enabled through the reg change through this ministerial order M065. This change was in our regulation, power engineer boiler pressure vessel safety regulation, and it was changed and it enabled us to register the plants. So why we had this? So what was the benefit of having plant registration? So we will be able to account for all the plants in BC. Like if somebody asks me how many first-class plants we have, I don't have a good count. I can make a rough estimate, but I don't have a good count because we register boilers. We did not register boiler plants. So what was happening is, although we have a data on boilers, how they're connected and how their capacities are affected and how they are classified is not captured in the system. So we would be able to, by doing this, we would be able to count how many first-class plants we have, how many second-class boiler plants we have, how many third-class boiler plants, so fourth-class, fifth-class onwards. So it would also provide us consistency of interpretation and application of boiler pressure vessel regulation. Why I say consistency? Because right now, if somebody is applying for their higher class of power engineers, they need to be working in a particular class of plant, and they need to be they need to know that this is a third class or a fourth class plant, so they know that they are eligible for the qualifying time. So they would have, the power engineers would have a clear visibility, and they would know that they would be getting the qualifying time. It will also harmonize the plant rating. So in all other jurisdictions, some jurisdictions are going by kilowatt. So by doing this, we would be in a position to harmonize with other provinces. It will also provide improved clarity on staffing requirement and eligible qualifying time. So if suppose somebody's plant is classified as a fourth class plant, then they know that they need to hire a fourth class chief engineer, they need to hire fifth class shift engineers. So that will provide a very good clarity, and this only good things will come out of this. So we're very optimistic on this. So 2017, this change became effective from October 2nd, 2017. And Technical Safety BC has been accepting application for plant operating permits. So this is, the registration is also called plant operating permit. So this will be registration, but it will be in the form of a permit. So the owners would be receiving a permit, which will be called a plant operating permit. And new plants that are placed into operation after October 2nd, 2017 requires this permit prior to operation. So any plant which is commissioned after October 2nd, 2017 will require this plant. But all other existing plants have until next year, until October 2nd, 2019 to apply for this plant operating permit. But for new plants, this is mandatory as we speak. 2018, 2019, so there will be a 2-year window provided for the existing plants, and the plant operating permit can be applied up to October 1st, 2019. There is no fee for this registration at this time, and it is an online process. So basically, again, the owner or the chief engineer needs to be logging into their client portal. So this time the client portal will be the company client portal. It won't be a certification client portal. Like suppose if a chief engineer has a certificate, so they would be having their private account, which would be for their certificate of qualification, and then they would have their other client online portal, which would be for the plant itself. So they would be requesting a login information for that client portal. Once they log in, they would be able to see all their permits, and under the client portal, they would be able to see all their boiler units. And besides the boiler units, they would be able to see a button which would say register plant. And once you hit that button, basically it enables you to fill out an online form, and that online form is very interactive. It would allow you to pick headers, and it will have drag and drop for your boiler unit. So basically, if a boiler plant has 3 headers and all individual boilers, so they would be dragging each individual boiler into those headers, and the headers would be classified. And once you configure all the headers, then it will say, okay, the highest header capacity would dictate the plant classification, and then the online form, the interactive online form would spit out a result which would say, okay, your plant is a 3rd class plant or whatever, and it would basically allow you to go further, and you would be required to provide a certification number for your chief engineer, and the form is linked to our online database. So basically, if a person puts on their certification number and their certification level is not matching with the plant classification level, then the system would not take that application. So if suppose somebody is working in a 1st class plant as a chief engineer, they need to have a 1st class certificate of qualification. So the person would put their last name as a chief engineer and their certification number, and automatically the system will check whether this 1st class or not. And once that form is filled out, you would submit it, and then basically it would be coming to a boiler safety officer for review. Boiler safety officer would assess the plant classification, and once the plant classification has been assessed, then the senior safety officer would be issuing a plant registration, and it is a certificate which needs to be posted in the machinery room, and that certificate will clearly say what classification of this plant is and what are the boilers associated with this plant. So recommendation for the owners. Owners of the existing plant should begin the process of obtaining the operating permit as we speak, like in 2018. If there's any brand new plant going in today, as soon as you apply for operating permit, you need to apply for a plant operating permit also. Owners of new plants must begin this plant registration process immediately to be compliant with the regulation. They need to know the type, capacity, service, and the header configuration of the equipment. So one of the things I would reiterate is the chief engineer, who might be in most cases would be the record keeper of this plant classification. So they need to, because they are able to see the record of all the equipment under the client portal, so they should first make sure that that data is correct or not. You might have a boiler which was long gone and it is still listed there, so then you should be letting us know before you submit that this data needs to be corrected. Also, if you see that some boiler is not included in that list, when they log into their client portal, they should apply for an operating permit before they move on. Otherwise, their plant classification would not be, accurately captured. Also, if suppose you see that the plant type has been, configured wrong in the system, like we might have a case where we have captured it as a high pressure thermal fluid unit, and in fact it is a low pressure thermal fluid unit, because it is going to affect their plant classification. So I would encourage to see, the chief engineer should be seeing that their plant classification and the type has been captured correctly before they submit this application. And once they submit this application, it would still be an initial stage, so this boiler safety officer would be able to either accept it or would send it back to chief engineer for finding, if they have any questions. So hopefully this thing would would clean up a lot of bad data. It will also provide clear direction, going forward what the plant is. And so I would encourage all the participants in this webinar or the chief engineers to know the details of this regulation. So they should go to the current regulation, which is Power Engineer Boiler Pressure Vessel Safety Regulation. Either you can Google BC Reg 104/2004 and it will come up. and the sections pertinent to this plant operating permit are 62.1, 62.2, and 69.1. So 69.1 describes some of the owner's responsibility, the chief engineers or the record keeper's responsibilities. So I would encourage all chief engineers to, or the record keepers, to know this regulation. So I would repeat, sections are 62.1, 62.3, 62.2 and 69.1. And if there are any questions on this topic, we can take it at this time. And that was all on this segment. Do we have any questions, Sister?
We do have a few questions.
Okay.
The first question is, what are the real duties of a fourth-class power engineer to a third-class plant?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, a person is working in a third-class plant, and the person is a fourth-class power engineer certificate qualification holder. So in a third-class plant, a person needs to be a holder of a fourth class in order to work as a shift engineer. So the shift engineers, if you go to the definition of a shift engineer is defined as a person in charge of the shift, and they have a responsibility. I can read out from the regulation. So few responsibilities they have as a shift engineer. One thing, they need to maintain control of the plant at all times. Okay, so let me go to this. So person in charge is a power engineer who needs to be present on the premises during the time they are designated by the owner or the chief engineer, and are responsible and in control of the plant while the plant is in operation. So they need to maintain the control of the plant at all times. Okay, so that is the duties, and then there are some other section of the regulations which define their duties. So one of the duties is defined in section 11, which says that a power engineer must thoroughly inspect every boiler, pressure vessel, piping system, fuel system, fittings, and ancillary equipment as soon as practical after the start of their shift. So they have the clear responsibility within the regulation to inspect it as soon as they start their shift. And chief engineer has some responsibilities too. So the best way to do this is, put up the regulation on your computer and then search for the keywords like shift engineer or chief engineer, and all the pertinent sections of that regulations you can search that way. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next question, Cecil.
Okay, so if you have a power engineer class higher than your plant requires, does this matter for your continued certification?
Good. So yeah, that's a good question. So if person is holding a class higher than required, they can still renew their certificate. So their certificate renewal is not based on what plant they are working, but they would only be getting their qualifying time as per the regulation. So if suppose the person needs to move to a higher level, they would have to serve in a plant which is required by the regulation. So they would probably would not get the qualifying time, but they would still be able to maintain their certificate.
Okay. What about places that have two completely separated plants? So school that has a heating plant operated by one department and a training plant operated by a different department?
That is a very good question, because that is for the same reason there is a provision in the regulation which allows the provincial safety manager to register two or more plants located on the same premise. So basically, if suppose like a campus, for example, like let's say UBC, for example, they have various plants throughout their campus. So those plants, can be managed by one set of crew, as long as they have written permission from the provincial safety manager, and as long as they have a plan in place how they're going to do it, because they still, at the end of the day, they still need to satisfy the regulation that they need to inspect all these plants at the start of the shift. They need to maintain control of all these plants. So all that intent of the regulation needs to be satisfied, but there is a provision in the regulation which allows 2 or more plants located on the same premise to be registered under this and can be managed independently.
Okay. And what about development properties that are not fully demolished, but the size of the plant will be increased significantly? Is that considered a new plant or existing?
Okay, this is again a very good question, because there might be situations where the plant classification will go up. So the regulations defines, they have a word in this one. Let me find out. So the regulation defines the existing plant as a plant where no regulated work has happened, like no installation has happened. So if suppose there is an existing plant and they have added a boiler, then technically it is a new plant. So meaning they would have to apply for this plant operating permit today. They cannot be waiting until October 2019, because that is not a new plant, that is not an existing plant anymore, because if you have even added one boiler, it becomes a new plant. Even the other other boilers might be old, but the new boiler would kick them into the new plant status. Okay.
Okay. And the next question, what about current unregistered low pressure hot water plants? Do they need an operating permit and to go through this process? And then there's a second part, it says, do refrigeration units also determine plant size?
Okay, these are very good questions, because we have also published, some of the frequently asked questions on our website. If somebody goes on our website and type in plant registration, they would be able to go to these frequently asked questions on that topic. But very good question. So I would answer that this way. So the regulation requires all boiler plants which require operators to be registered under this new plant operating permit. So if a plant is a first class plant, it needs to be registered. If it is a second class plant, it needs to be registered. Third, fourth, and fifth needs to be registered. It does not require any plant which do not require operator to be registered. So anything lower than fifth class, it does not require, the plant does not require this operating permit. Refrigeration plant are also excluded from this requirement. So if there is a refrigeration plant, they do not require this operating permit, because the system, we have already a data for the refrigeration plants, so that's why they are not included in this regulation. So only first class, second class, third class, fourth class, and fifth class, and oil well boilers needs to be registered. Rest all other plants does not require this. And so the refrigeration plant capacity is not going to be added to boiler plant capacity. So they would be like, if a site has a refrigeration plant and a site has a heating plant and power plant, like a high pressure steam boiler, so technically they are owner of 3 plants, one power plant, one heating plant, one refrigeration plant. But only the highest plant would dictate, the plant classification. So they would only need a plant registration for the highest plant. So they would pick a headers, but only the highest header would determine the plant classification. Any more questions?
Those are all the questions that we have right now.
Okay, good. So I would encourage all the participants, if they have any questions, just go to our website. Our website has been enhanced. We have a brand new website, and it has a good search engine this time. So you can search by keywords like plant registration, and it will take you to the plant registration page. And there is a brand new guide which we have published for plant registration. That guide is for the clients to use, how to register it, how to access client portal, how to register their boiler plants. So it's all given there. And similarly for certificate of qualification also, you can search by renewal, certificate of qualification renewal, and we have frequently asked questions on that topic also. Okay, that's all from me then, Cecile.
That's everything that we have today.
Okay, good. Thank you all for joining, and wish you good luck. And if you have still any questions, you can always contact our contact@technicalsafetybc.ca or that toll-free number which we gave you before. Okay, thanks a lot, and have a good day, gentlemen and gentlewomen. Sorry.
Thank you very much for joining us today.